I'm going to talk a bit about cities and farmers and why bother, and then Chantal is going to say a bit more about food systems and climate. So, as way of introduction, but basically, I think we talk an awful lot. Certainly in Nourish, we talk a lot about the global food system and yada yada yada. We need to transform the global food system, and I think it's really important to remember that the global food system is actually made up. It's a bit like a forest. It's made up of a whole bunch of interconnecting local food systems, which go through the mycelium of corporate trading and business and commodity trading, and join up. But ultimately, um, local food systems matter. People experience their food system locally, and most food, despite the best efforts of international business and governments, is still not traded across borders. Most food stays within the countries where it's produced and is eaten there. So it's really important to sort of think about, if we're going to see global food system transformation, that's going to come through local food system transformation and bottom up stuff as much as top down stuff. We don't have a global governance system for food, and obviously that's going to be an important part of the change. But a huge amount of the change that's needed will come through local action, local initiatives, local dynamism, local innovation, local partnerships. So, and I think COVID obviously has highlighted that for so many people around the world. Suddenly waking up in the pandemic, in lockdown, and figuring out that we're hugely dependent on long food chains, and people looking out from cities like Glasgow across the world and they're going, we can see lots of fields from here, but none of the food that we're actually eating comes from anywhere near where we live. And that's not been just a Glasgow experience or a London experience or a Lagos experience. That's been a global experience. That sort of disconnect between cities and local authorities and the food that they're actually eating. So all of that is part of the background to it. What cities do about food matters, and it matters both because they've got a lot of the levers of power. Local government is very weak in the UK, but it's much stronger in other parts of the world. But even in the UK, local authorities have a huge amount of power over the food environment. They have powers over public procurement. Some of them have powers over land use and land allocation. They have powers over economic development. They have powers over farmers' markets, and they can incentivize certain types of retail and disincentivize other types of catering. There's lots of things they can do if they choose to do that. But also cities and local governments tend to be the most innovative when it comes to food policy. Most of the most exciting food policies come from local government first, and then quite often they work their way up into national governments. But also, really importantly, local authorities are more trusted than national governments. Universally, not just in the UK, but across the world, local authorities typically will come out on top when you ask which government do you trust more, which level of government do you trust more, and that's because people are in everyday contact with local government. They run the schools, or they empty the bins, or they sweep the roads, or they fix the houses, or whatever it is they do. People are in contact with local government. It's more accessible. So if you're asking people to change what they do in terms of the food system, local governments are absolutely key ambassadors in that change process. But also, obviously, farmers matter. And, we're asking farmers to make the biggest change in all of this. As we move from the food system we have to something which is better for climate, better for nature, and better for people, it's farmers who have to do the heavy lifting here. Farmers are looking to see, can I keep making a living in the new world that you're asking me to join? What will it take? How can I get there? Is there space for me? And too often, farmers in policy have been excluded from the sort of center of food policy making. And they've been very often, I think, seen as donkeys. The way that you deal with farmers is you either give them sticks and tell them they can't do stuff, or you give them carrots and say, if you do this, we'll reward you. But that whole sense of farmers as being a sort of passive end of the policy process, I think we've had for too long. Farmers are people for other people to tell what to do. And the reality is, of course, that farmers across the world are often the most innovative and creative problem solvers because they have to be. And they're constantly coming up with new ways of doing things and new approaches because they think about it a lot, because that's what they do for a day job. And so I think it's essential that farmers get involved. So I think for those two reasons, that's why we've been working with Chantal Ipez and Elujalo and other people on the Glasgow process, is to connect cities and farmers into COP26 both these actors have been too much sidelined when it comes to both food policy conversations, but also conversations about climate. And we're doing our bit, I think, to try to raise those voices in the conversation at COP26 and in the run up to COP26 through the Glasgow Declaration and the Fork to Farm dialogues. So I hope that's a bit of an introduction, and I'll hand over to Chantal to say a bit more about food and climate.
Thank you so much, Pete. Over to you, Chantal.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Sophie. So I'm Chantal Clément, and I'm the Deputy Director of IPES Food, which is the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. And it's really a real pleasure to be with all of you today, and really to have been collaborating with Nourish and our many, many partners since the last year to get food issues onto the international climate agenda and to support local voices in joining these discussions. So I think Pete already stated very eloquently why we need to involve local actors and farmers into not just food systems, but just major international processes like COP26. So I wanted to maybe recap some of the reasons why it's crucial to be thinking about policy integration, and specifically integrated food policies when we're thinking about sustainability and the climate crisis, and maybe just provide a brief overview of the Glasgow Declaration itself and how this brings all of this together. So first, Pete already said it, but I think it's really worth a reminder that our food systems cause and are affected by basically all of the world's biggest challenges today. And I think tackling climate change and increasing our resilience, whether it's in the face of COVID or other potential pandemics and shocks, is really intimately tied to our capacity to develop more sustainable food systems. But maybe beyond what we often talk about, which is farm level practices or maybe changing our own consumer food habits, we really need the policies and the institutional systems in place to be able to help get us there. And so integrated food policies for us is really a key tool in this, in the way that it integrates the economic, the social, the environmental, and the governance dimensions of food policy under this really single comprehensive framework. And I think within most governments, we know, unfortunately, at this stage, that responsibilities for policies that affect the food system is really split across many different ministries or departments, whether we're talking about agriculture or health or labor or environmental policy, and that each of these areas and all of the people working within them tend to set their agendas based on their own objectives and their own interests. So there is this kind of unfortunate tendency that we try to focus immediately on our own policy goals, our own interests, without really looking at the interconnections and the important links that need to be made between all of these different areas and these different levels, and then looking at the opportunities that this can allow for. So I think greater policy coherence can really affect the multiple challenges that cause and are faced by food systems today. And that really occurs again when policy actions across sectors and levels are really actively aligned towards meeting shared goals. And we know that the goal of sustainable food systems is so comprehensive and wide-reaching. And I think as Pete briefly talked about, we also know that there's these important inconsistencies between governance levels. And like we just said, we often hear that it's at the local level that things are really happening, things are really moving forward. We have these short supply chain initiatives, we have public procurement. And I think for us, what's really important is that we have these inclusive and participatory governance mechanisms through food policy councils. But then we're not seeing this uptake at the national level or at the international level. And there isn't just the recognition, there isn't the support for these kinds of local level initiatives to really flourish and to be taken up at higher levels. So I think we need national level policies to both support and learn from local level experimentation and policy change. And because of these barriers, that's just not happening now. And I think already to this date, a number of city level networks are recognizing this need for greater coordination between governance levels. And again, this just hasn't been met with the enabling environment that we need. So this kind of brings us to the need for what we're hoping is a kind of major initiative leading up to the COP, which is the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration. And so as mentioned, we at IPES Food, Nourish Scotland, and a wide range of civil society partners and government authorities are encouraging the adoption of this declaration at COP26. And it will be hopefully this big opportunity to bring food systems reform at the forefront of the climate debate at the international level. More specifically, I think the declaration was just shared in the chat if you want to read the actual text, but the declaration itself is really a call by subnational authorities of all kinds, of all sizes, to tackle the climate and nature emergencies through integrated food policies. And of course, it's also a call to action for national governments to step up and to support them and to act in accordance. And again, given these great innovations we're seeing at the local level, it's really an opportunity to bring the critical role of these subnational actors to fight for climate change and to be at the negotiating table at COP26, and not just national governments as it's been in previous years. I think we already have examples of countries and regions and cities that are attempting policy integration. And so we're using this declaration as the opportunity to raise these initiatives up and to use them as examples of what government authorities around the world should be aspiring to. I think it's very positive for us to say that the declaration was launched by its pre-signatories this past December, so just about a month ago now, I think, where our pre-signatories, so all of those who've already signed the declaration, have really just showed their commitment and their willingness to make ambitious calls for food policies and climate action and combine those two things. And again, this process is really only just beginning. And so maybe to close, I wanted to just end on the fact that policy coherence isn't just about what I've said. It's not just about coordinating between government ministries and between government levels. But I think what's also really crucial is to get input from outside formal governance processes. I think policy coherence is also just listening to citizens and listening to everyone who has a stake in the food system. So that means being inclusive, it means being participatory, and that means bringing together not just policymakers, but farmers and consumers, schools, healthcare officials, local authorities, and everyone else into the conversation to be able to develop a shared vision of the food system. And hopefully a little part of that is what we're doing today. So maybe just thanks for your attention. And myself, IPES Food and Nourish and all of our teams are really available at any time if you want more details on this work. And I think everything else that's relevant is being shared in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chantal, and thank you for ending on the note about participatory governance as well, and the importance of just listening to everyone who's got a stake in the food system. And really the next speaker, Luju, the founder of Youth for Environment Nigeria, and a young farmer himself, will introduce another strand of the Glasgow process and our projects leading up to COP26, which really owns in on this idea of creating the foundation for inclusive food policies and participatory processes, which is trust between farmers and their local communities. So I'll pass over to Olujolo, who's joining from Nigeria, who will talk about the Fork to Farm dialogues that we're organizing ahead of COP26. To you, Olujolo.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Thank you so much, Sophie. Again, like Sophie said, my name is Olujolo, the founder of Youth for the Environment Nigeria, basically a youth-led non-governmental organization working with farmers and young people in Nigeria and Africa to mobilize for sustainable farming practices. And basically, Pete has introduced the Glasgow process in its entirety, and Chantal has also given a brief outline of the policy need, as well as emphasized the need to listen to these trusted and concerned stakeholders in ensuring a just transition to food and farming. So once again, I'm excited to welcome you all to this session. And so basically, I will just give a brief overview of the second strand of the Glasgow process, which is the Fork to Farm dialogue. And basically, the Fork to Farm dialogue aims to build on the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration that Chantal has just introduced us to. Basically, the Fork to Farm dialogue, the aim is to provide a platform, an equitable one, to bring together representatives of diverse communities of food producers, and as well as city representatives, to bring them together to engage in this constructive exchange towards a just transition in the way our food is grown and also consumed as well. And of course, the essentiality that we know of ensuring this just transition is found in its potency to address the triple challenge of the climate change crisis, the threats to nature and biodiversity, and of course, the efforts ensure the achievement of the sovereignty and security of food in ways that are, of course, fair and coherent. So, of course, the need for this Fork to Farm dialogue is drawn from an understanding that to really achieve this just transition into a more sustainable food system would need a healthy conversation and, of course, partnership and trust building between farmers as well as the government representatives, particularly at the local level, where we are currently seeing increased commitment to actions towards ensuring a just transition in food and farming. And of course, farmers, as used, as stated earlier, represent diverse actors in the food production space, both large scale, irrespective of the scale of production. So the farm to farm dialogue basically will be happening across the world by a group of actors in the food and farming space around about 20 different locations globally. And basically the aim of this farm to farm dialogue is to ensure and build trust and partnerships between government as well as the food actors, the producers, now in their diverse form, who of course, like Pete mentioned earlier, are essential to movement towards ensuring this just transition in the food and farming space. And of course, the space we're talking about is one that is equitable and resilient, and of course, able to deliver on this the wide range of healthy food which we of course need. So it is of course important to state that the aim of this dialogue at its essence is not to point out that a particular farming system or a particular farming approach or solution is the right one. The aim basically is to provide a platform, like I mentioned, the equitable one, where farmers and cities can come together and deliberate and discuss, arrive at a common ground that moves us closer towards achieving the just transition in our food system to one, of course, that is more sustainable. And so basically the dialogue will bring together farmers that are already adopted the sustainable farming approach, as well as those that are still very much conventional in their approaches. So irrespective of the scale of farming as well, it will bring together subsistence, commercial farmers, like I said, irrespective of the scale of production, to together come up and discuss heavily in an equitable platform towards what we want future food to look like. Of course, talking about the dialogue methodology now. Like Chanta earlier mentioned, the team in charge, of course, that will be hosting and facilitating the dialogue, experienced and of course positions to bring together these farmers as well as the city representatives, and of course engage other food actors from activists to environmentalists and climate change actors, of course, towards working together and collaboratively agreeing on what should be and what the best practices towards ensuring the just transition that we sought is really achieved. So talking about the timeline now, the dialogue is set to will host for a period of over 6 months, which is to ensure that a lasting relationship and is really established, and to also see the possibility of forming synergies between these diverse actors that are of course essential to achieving just transition to a more sustainable approach of growing food, of course, farming as well. So over a period of 6 months of these constructive and enriching discussions, and of course, this is to ensure that relationship is lasting and one that won't be for a short while, towards ensuring that by 2020, the aim of achieving a just transition would have been achieved. And we believe that local governments normally have this power to effect change at the local level, and basically to the engagement of actors at the local level is of course essential to achieving this just transition. For example, in Africa, we enjoy of the food we eat, both by the local communities and the rural communities, acting and mobilizing for efforts at the local government level and engaging in this enriching discussion and building this trust, also the laying of this ground for relationship building between diverse food producers as well as the government is indeed essential to achieving the just transition in the aspect of food and farming. So basically, the Farm to Farm dialogue would have two main activities, and the first one is about the local dialogue, which will be holding in about 20 different locations globally, which I talked about earlier, and would be for a period of over 6 months. And the second, which I believe Pete and Chanta also mentioned, is the main dialogue, which will be holding at COP26. So the local dialogues are in the lead of, and to also ensure that the discussions, the enriching discussions that will be holding at the main dialogue at COP26 now will be representative of what is obtainable at the local level. And that's why the first ways would be the first aspect of the Farm to Farm dialogue would be connecting with farmers and local governments at the local level to understand clearly the ideals and perspectives to lead into the main dialogue that will be holding at COP26, so that the voices of these concerned stakeholders and that are essential to achieving the just transition would be included at the discussion table. And yeah, just before I round it up, I want to emphasize the aspect where the dialogue would be to build trust and also lay the ground for partnerships and relationship building. And because we believe that trusted voices at the local level helps indeed to achieve the aim of just transition. And there is nothing that helps better than ensuring that these diverse actors in the food system are brought together alongside the people that makes the policy and the decisions, bringing them together to engage collaboratively and also to discuss on what it is we want for the future of food to become more sustainable. And that's the essence of this Farm to Farm dialogue, building trust and also a lasting relationship towards achieving a just transition in food and farming. Before, let me welcome Sophie to move us further. Shortly, we'll be moving into breakout section to speak about what our vision for food is and what we want to see in the future of food. And Sophie, back to you, please.
Thank you so much, Lucio. And thanks for really zooming in on this importance of trust for building a just transition in food and farming. That's really at the essence of the Farm to Farm dialogues that we're organizing. And over the past months, we've been working with the steering group and many food activists and farmers to find a methodology that works. And part of this is creating a space to really listen to each other's dreams and hopes for the future of food, and engaging in those different narratives and reflections. So that's what this next exercise is going to be about. And because we've opened up the space for more people, I'm going to have to ask for some volunteers among you to help us navigate through that exercise. So I'll spend a bit of time setting that out, and then Evie here is going to help me put everyone into breakout rooms. Maybe just to say on a technical note first, if you find yourself in a breakout room after a few minutes where there's not that many people, feel free to come back into the main room and we'll try and reallocate you. But you should be about around 10 people in each breakout room. So what we're going to do is in the breakout room, we want to invite you to be part of a task that owns in on local action and your vision for the future. So thinking about, in light of the presentations on food and climate change that we've just heard, consider the following prompt. And I invite you to write down an answer. Take 2 minutes to write a concise and specific answer to the prompt. And in the breakout room, you will then be given 90 seconds, 1.5 minutes, to present this to the group while others listen actively. And I'll come to that in a second. And the prompt is, and I'll put this in the chat as well, imagine you wake up in the year 2030. What if your dream and vision for the food system has become a reality? What would a moment from a day in your life look like? So you wake up in 2030, your dream and vision for the food system in your place has come true. Describe or tell a story about a moment in the day in your life. And the prompt here is to think creatively and imaginatively to focus on the what if question and let go of present constraints, but also to situate yourself within reality and think about who will still be around, what forces will still be around in 2030, and to be specific. So I'm going to invite Pete to give a brief example just to situate what that can look like. If you don't mind, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie.
90 seconds.
Yeah, and apologies to David and everybody else on this call who's got cows too. But I've been banging on for some time about trying to have cows and trees together on the farm, because at the moment, until the trees have been grown about 10 years in Scotland, they're not big enough to resist the cows who they don't just browse them, which is fine, but they knock them over. So so I've been waiting for someone to develop smart collars that can keep the cows away from the trees, basically, without us having to put up fences around every single tree, so we can grow more trees on the farm. So my dream is in 2030 that this technology, which at the moment is about 300 quid per cow, that I've saved up enough, or it's become cheap enough, that I've got collars on all my cows, so I can let them wander around the farm, have a lot more autonomy, have a lot more fun, but also grow a lot more trees on the farm. So I've sort of offset all my emissions on the farm, but I also have much happier cows, because when there's trees that are big enough to browse, I can just get on my phone and let them browse those trees, but not let them browse the other ones, and certainly keep them off my vegetables, which would be great too. So this is my dream. And also, if there's one calving, then I'll know all about it without having to go out in the middle of the night to check. So this is my dream, that I have a more productive farm with more trees on it, happier cows, and more sleep at night when they're calving. So that's my very simple dream.
Thank you so much, Pete. So that's an example of just the kind of level of being specific and also relating it to your particular and personal context. And that means that everyone's visions will naturally be very different from each other. And then as last prompt, because as my colleague introduced yesterday, the seasonality here will make a big difference. So do start with the date for your specific moment in a day in your life in 2030. I've just put an example in the chat, if this makes sense to you. So I'll leave that in the chat and send it out. That is the prompt. And I'll ask everyone to just take a couple of minutes to write down a small story. When you're in the breakout rooms, nominate someone or do it collectively to make sure that everyone has 90 seconds to share this story with the rest of the group. Do respect that time, so cut off when you get to 90 seconds. And if you don't get to 90 seconds, then leave that space so there's a bit of space for pause and for reflection. The breakout rooms will come in a minute. We're just going to explain how it's all going to work first. While everyone talks about their story, I invite everyone else to put aside their own thoughts and their own story that they're going to contribute in a minute or have just contributed, and listen actively, and to engage in doing so by writing down one reflection or question to each story that's being told. You'll then have a few minutes in the breakout room chat together to hear some of those reflections that really stood out for you. If you have a facilitator from our team, we'll guide this, but otherwise I invite you to nominate someone who's going to keep to the 90 seconds per person and call on those particular reflections in the end of the session. I'll keep sending those prompts out. So just to reiterate, you've got the prompt, think about a moment of a day in your life in 2030, be specific, be precise, and listen actively and note down a reflection to the other contributions in your group. The final thing to say, I think, is that after 25 minutes, we'll come back to the main session and we'll engage in a bit of collective reflection and discussion about the stories that you all brought in the breakout rooms.
Great. Well, welcome back, everybody. Do you think that's us all tumbled back through cyberspace into the room? Good. We've got half an hour nearly left of the workshop, and what we're going to be doing at about 4:15 is putting it back into very small groups, really for a sort of reflection, debrief, and hopefully a bit of accountability. You know, saying what you're going to do and asking someone to hold you accountable for that. So hopefully that we'll spend 10 minutes on that. So we've got about 15 minutes now for a more general sort of conversation, really. And what would be nice, I think, is to reflect together on the big themes that came out of that. You know, because obviously we've all got, I mean, certainly in our group, we had so many rich different issues and things and people's visions and all that. So I think rather than sort of restate our vision, we'd be really keen to hear people's reflections on that, their thoughts on other people's visions, what that sparked in them, yeah, or any big themes that came out of it, for that, anything that was unexpected for you, in a sense, something that you heard you weren't expecting to hear, something new or something novel that somebody else said that really touched you. So it's almost impossible, I think, for me to know how to moderate this session with so many people here. But if somebody wants to unmute and come in, and we'll try to manage the chaos. Is that okay?
I was in a breakout room just now, hosted by Yvonne in Scotland. And at the very end, after each of us provided a kind of a vignette of our dream reality of 2030, Yvonne raised the question, partly rhetorically perhaps, well, is this realistic to see a future in which there are no large production farms? And that really made me think that much of the food that we eat, 2/3 of it, I guess, as humans, is grains and legumes. And so one way to think about whether there is reality or realistic possibility of these dream futures is whether or not there would be a reduction in the amount of grain production and grain consumption, and a return to other types of food, especially if we think about reducing meat consumption as well.
Sounds like a great reflection. Although I know last year or the year before, I think Harper Adams grew the first acre of wheat without human intervention. And I did wonder whether we could borrow some of those robots to grow an acre of wheat on our farm rather than having to have a
Oh, he's gone. He's muted himself.
You muted yourself.
Yeah, which make you have to grow. I think somebody else did that. I could understand why. to grow things at scale. Anyway, but so interesting. A really good point about grain.
Can I come in here?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, Dee from the Forest of Dean. A bit reflecting what John just said, but also in our group, there was quite a lot of mention of food being grown on a very small scale by people in community gardens and allotments. And I think one of the things about the Oxford Real Farming Conference is that it hasn't really taken that on as one of the really big ways that we will get our food in the future, and a very sustainable way too, alongside farms that are smaller.
Rachel, come in.
Yeah, we had a similar thing in our group about people wanting to be able to buy food in their local area that was produced by people in their local area, and being connected with those people making it and the artisans, and this sense of communal areas being accessible, and the land being worked, and the land working, as in it not being exhausted or not working, but it working for everything. And we said it feels very hopeful, and like we've heard these stories before, and we wondered what were the barriers that were in place stopping us from doing it, and whether some of those things, is it a 4-day week, or is it a mind shift, or a sense of just being able to start, it not having to be perfect, but start and then improve things from there.
That sounds a great idea. And it's not like we need to grow everything locally, but Dundee had a food growing plan out recently saying that they could grow 5 a day for everybody in Dundee from the land inside the city walls. And that was without ploughing up any golf courses for anybody who loves golf. So, it's not going to be all our food, but there's certainly opportunities in Europe to see much more of that urban and peri-urban production at scale, I think, definitely. Especially once we get rid of the cars out of the city centres, would be great.
Can I come in there?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Yes, we had a very similar debate, and I think that two things. I do think people will be growing more of their own food. I think that COVID has made people much keener on gardening, and it's a question of knowledge and not being frightened of trying it at the end of the day. It's a bit like people not learning how to cook. And I think that once people start gardening and take a packet of seeds and see that they can do it and how easy it is, people will start growing more plant food, because that's our diet needs great deal more of that. And I think they'll find out they can do it where they can do it in their bathroom, they can do it in their homes, they can do it on their balcony. It's perfectly feasible to do, but I think it's that knowledge marriage barrier and the encouragement, and looking at people thinking about their gardens now is one step towards this growing their own food, even if it's just strawberries in a pot.
Great. Kerry, you want to come in, I think.
I was just thinking that it's not just about us growing in our own gardens and allotments, that's great, but we also need the local authority to make more land available for small nurseries and small growing groups. I mean, in one of the local parks in Cambridge, a city farm's been set up, and that's will be a good way of showing people what they can do. But also the other thing I think that's really important is that we get local authorities to the stage where they have to, by law, make a food footprint for every community, every city, every town, every village has to have its own food footprint, and then start working within their food footprint towards how to localize food.
Anyone else want to come in on that or another point? David?
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I've got David and Evie. Can I take David first and then you, Evie? Is that right?
Of course.
Okay. I'd just like to make the observation that over 20 years of organic farming and moving into what's loosely called regenerative farming practices, and having seen the impact on our farm, on the farm diversity, on the soil, on the animals and the food that we're producing, having seen that in practice, it convinces me that this is a sustainable way of producing our food, and it's really the only way forward. But it is practical, it is productive, and it is efficient, and it's trying to convince the policy people, the powers that be, that this is a real way forward in practice, and it's very frustrating because we were talking 20 years ago to organic farmers who told us this and we didn't believe it, and now we're trying to say the same thing now and having the same problem. It's not, things haven't changed very much.
That's right, and I think we tend to assume, David, that as soon as somebody does something better, the world beats a path to their door. But you know, it's only 10 years since we had plenty of people standing up saying wind turbines couldn't possibly produce enough electricity to make a difference. You know, and that was seen as, you know, sensible, that what they were saying, and the body of the Kirk. Evie, can I bring you in?
Thank you. Nice to see you, David. I'm not convinced that we need grains at all. Grains are quite recent in our evolution, and they're not particularly good for us. I think we grow our own food already, and you can eat all sorts of things in the winter, your winter squash and your beetroot and your tatties, and so I think at this latitude, I also think that this recent thing of not eating so much meat, and I say this as a vegetarian who is trying to learn to eat meat, because I think that if you do mob grazing or you do wilding, you will be raising really good grass-fed beef. And I've always wondered how humans got enough essential fatty acids if they don't all live near the sea, and as we're kind of can't keep eating from the seas anyway. But in fact, grass-fed beef does have essential fatty acids in it. I'm also interested in us growing fiber for making cloth, like flax and hemp. Flax was grown in Fife, you know, a long time ago, and so there's so much potential. And also, as far as drawing down carbon goes, this is also important because of climate change, and especially things like hemp, which grows so fast, and you can also use it for building. Hempcrete is amazing stuff. So there's loads going on. We've just got to have more of it. And at this latitude, and anywhere where there's grasslands across the planet, by using, you know, like Alan Savory's ideas, we can really be drawing down the carbon. If we stop burning the fossil fuels, it'd be great. And also, we don't have to see this big changes. We need to make big changes, but life will be fun. And that was the thing that came to me most listening to everybody. Life can be very good going this way. It won't be grim and sad. And even though we might not get our nice sliced bread, we'll be very happy.
That's great, Evie, thank you. And apparently you can make batteries out of hemp. I was reading yesterday that hemp, you can make graphene really cheaply out of hemp. So hemp seems to be the thing of the future, along with seaweed. Saga Shah, were going to come in.
Yeah, thank you, mate. I've just got a very quick few points to make. I've been doing research in hemp and the cannabis industry for years. I've got a lot of friends in the industry. The issue here is that if we want to grow hemp, then we have to look at how much land is actually being acquisitioned and reused for planting these monstrosities of wind turbines, because you've got all over Africa and India, you've got wind turbines being dumped, and the materials are coming from there as well. So how are we going to grow our food locally? In my opinion, it has got to be the hemp, it's got to be the flax, it's got to be local systems. We have to look at and learn from India, where you had just at the end of November, December, you had 12 million farmers storm to Delhi and do a massive protest against the lockdowns, because 12 million farmers are now starving to death. And this is a really serious issue. So this is connected to how we localize systems, because the farmers in India are telling us, without us, you're nothing. But in terms of localizing food systems, we have to look at this very pertinent issue of where are the minerals coming from for these wind turbines and solar panels, which could easily be made out of hemp and bamboo. And why are these minerals being stolen from my lands in India and Africa and then dumped back in India and Africa when we can't be bothered to actually recycle them? You've got a lot of leakage of lithium into the soil. And how is that material or that leakage affecting the soil that should be used for growing our food? And you've got a lot of waste of wind turbines, everything being dumped all over France and the UK as well. So we really have to look at the land and how it's being used. Do we want it to be covered in solar panels and wind turbines, or do we want them to be covered in hemp and flax and all the local pulses and grains and even seaweed, as is and as was traditions of the whole of the British Isles? But we really need to pay attention to how our land is being used for placing wind turbines, which have got the blood of Indians and Africans all over it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's 4:15. What we were going to do now, I think with Adie's help, was to go into small groups, really to have everybody a chance in a small group to reflect on what they've heard, what they've thought, and as I said, to see if you want to make any sort of commitment as to what you're going to be doing to take your vision forwards or somebody else's vision forwards, and how you can keep in touch with at least somebody else from this group. So I think we're ready to be shifted again through cyberspace. And thank you very much, everybody. If you have to go before the end, thanks for joining in.
So for a close, thank you all so much for joining us and participating in the workshop. It's been so inspiring to listen to your visions and reflections. And hopefully the workshop has also inspired you and showed how listening to new perspectives and reflecting on the small steps we can take locally can build trust and collaboration. And I think one thing that stood out for me listening to the reflections is that we need trust and collaboration to shift power and shift resources and enable that change in the food systems that's needed for a more healthy planet. And so for closing, I'll just return to how we opened the session with recognizing that global change is enacted locally, and that it's farmers and their local communities, regardless of the type and size, who are ultimately the implementers of international food and climate change policy. And international policy forums such as COP26 are key to creating enabling environments, but the targets that are set there by national governments fall far short of what's needed to meet the Paris Agreement and to realize the right to food and the rights of future generations and of nature. And therefore, it's vital that we enact this change from the ground up. And that's why we talk about using COP26 to build momentum for food systems transformation that we need through policy integration, local relationships, dialogues, and action. That's why we talk about using COP26 to build momentum. Because while COP26 as an international forum is important, it's also a talking shop, and the real change is happening on the ground, and it's driven by farmers and by citizens in their local communities. And I think the stories and actions that you shared today speak very loudly to this, and also to how farmers' knowledge and practices hold critical solutions to the climate emergency. And therefore, at the essence of these projects around COP26 of the Glasgow Declaration and the Fork to Farm dialogues, is that to achieve a just transition in food and farming, we need not only to bring the message that we need a food systems approach to climate change, but also the stories of farmers and cities as told by their own voices to spaces like COP26 and use that as a catalyst for change. So thanks everyone for participating and for sharing your visions and your stories. And please do stay in touch both with your accountability partners and with us. We'll pop some details in the chat. And hope you have a wonderful time at the rest of the conference. Thanks so much to the Oxford Real Farming Conference team for having us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Great. Well done.
Thanks.
Cheerio. Thank you.
Very much.
Bye.